December 16, 1944. Private Samuel Hayes, age 23, stood on a frozen ridge near the Belgian border. The maps called it Hill 49, but every soldier in his company had given it another name, Iron Hill. It was not iron because of the soil, but because of the men who stood on it. For 3 days they had fought without rest. For 3 nights they had slept beside rifles, waiting for the next wave of war to climb toward them. The wind cut across the hill like a knife. The air smelled of snow, metal, and death. Somewhere far below, artillery thundered in the valley, but up here the sound was sharper, like the sky itself was cracking apart. Samuel wiped frost from his eyelashes and looked to his captain, Robert Lane, a man whose calm voice had carried the company through everything from the forests of Normandy to the nightmare of this ridge. Lane had told them that this hill guarded the only road left to a nearby village where hundreds of wounded American soldiers were being treated. If the enemy took Iron Hill, those wounded men would die. Captain Lane's words were simple. "We hold. No retreat. No surrender." And so they held. That morning began in silence. The kind of silence that presses on the ears. The snow was so deep it swallowed footsteps. The trees stood bare and black, like skeletons reaching out of the white. Samuel checked his rifle and tried to keep his fingers from freezing. He thought of home, of his father's cornfields in Ohio, and wondered if snow had fallen there too. At 9 o'clock, the first shell screamed over the hill. Then another. Then 100 more. The world exploded into light and fire. The ground shook so hard Samuel thought the earth itself would break. He dove into a foxhole, his helmet rattling, his heart hammering in his chest. Mud and blood mixed together. The smell of cordite filled the air. The bombardment went on for what felt like forever. When it finally stopped, a strange quiet returned. Then came the sound every man feared, the enemy's whistles. Captain Lane stood up from the trench, his coat torn and blackened. "Positions!" he shouted. His voice carried through the smoke. "Iron Company, fire!" Samuel rose with the others and opened fire down the slope. The first wave of enemy soldiers moved through the snow in dark lines. Their helmets gleamed in the weak sunlight. Machine guns rattled. The hill came alive with flashes and noise. Bullets struck the snow all around. Samuel fired again and again until his rifle clicked empty. Beside him, Sergeant Miller passed him another clip without a word. The sergeant grinned even as shells burst nearby. "We're still here, Sam," he said. But a moment later, a mortar exploded near the trench. Miller fell, blood soaking through his coat. Samuel wanted to reach him, but the captain's command rang out again. "Hold your ground." He stayed. Tears froze on his cheeks as he fired into the smoke. By noon, the snow was no longer white. It was gray and red. The enemy attack slowed. The ridge was littered with bodies. The men of Iron Company barely spoke. They were too tired for words. When the firing stopped, Samuel crawled to Miller's side. The sergeant was gone. His hand still held the dog tags of a younger soldier who had fallen the day before. Samuel pressed the tags into his own pocket and whispered, "We'll finish this for you." Captain Lane moved along the trench, his face streaked with mud. Their ammunition was half gone. Food was gone. Cold crept through everything, but not one of them spoke of retreat. At 3 in the afternoon, the second assault came. This time, tanks rolled through the valley, their engines growling like beasts. The ground trembled under the tracks. Samuel gripped his rifle and whispered a prayer. The captain called for the bazooka team. Their ammunition was half gone. Food was gone. Cold crept through everything, but not one of them spoke of retreat. At 3 in the afternoon, the second assault came. This time, tanks rolled through the valley, their engines growling like beasts. The ground trembled under the tracks. Samuel gripped his rifle and whispered a prayer. The captain called for the bazooka team. 2 men crawled forward on their stomachs through the snow. One was only 19, Corporal Dean. He fired once, missed, fired again, and the tank erupted in flames. Cheers broke out across the line. But the second tank fired back, and the explosion swallowed Dean in a storm of snow and smoke. When it cleared, there was nothing left but a burned helmet. The captain bowed his head for a moment, then turned back to his men. "You see that?" he shouted. "That's what bravery looks like. That's what America looks like." They fought through the afternoon and into the night. The sky turned black and full of fire. Artillery flashes lit the clouds like lightning. Samuel's rifle barrel glowed hot. When his bullets ran out, he grabbed Miller's weapon. When that ran dry, he used his bayonet. The captain bowed his head for a moment, then turned back to his men. "You see that?" he shouted. "That's what bravery looks like. That's what America looks like." They fought through the afternoon and into the night. The sky turned black and full of fire. Artillery flashes lit the clouds like lightning. Samuel's rifle barrel glowed hot. When his bullets ran out, he grabbed Miller's weapon. When that ran dry, he used his bayonet. He could barely feel his hands. Frostbite had taken most of the feeling. When the darkness became total, Captain Lane gathered what was left of his company. 19 men, dirty, bleeding, exhausted, but alive. They huddled around a small lantern in a ruined dugout. "They'll attack again before dawn," he said. "But we are the line. Behind us are wounded men. Behind them is our country. We don't fall." No one disagreed. No one complained. Samuel thought of the faces of the men who had fallen Dean. Miller, the radio operator who used to whistle jazz tunes, the medic who gave away his coat to a freezing soldier and never woke up. They were all still here in some way, part of the hill itself. Around midnight, the snow started again, soft and heavy. Samuel leaned against the frozen sandbags, eyes half closed, rifle resting on his knees. Then came the sound of engines and boots. The final assault. Captain Lane raised his hand. "Now!" he whispered. The Americans opened fire. The night turned white with muzzle flashes. The enemy came in waves, shouting, screaming, firing. Tracers zipped through the darkness. Men fell all around. The captain stood upright, firing his pistol until it clicked empty. Then he picked up a fallen rifle and kept shooting. Samuel saw the captain fall once, get back up, then fall again. He crawled to him through the mud and dragged him behind a mound of earth. The captain was bleeding from the shoulder but smiled. "Keep them off the ridge," he said. "They can't have it." The enemy kept coming. Grenades exploded. Smoke rolled down the trenches. The Americans fought hand to hand. One soldier, barely 18, used a shovel as a weapon. Another threw himself over a grenade to save 2 friends. Samuel could no longer tell how long it had been. The night seemed endless. He felt something warm on his leg and realized he had been hit, but he stayed upright. He could hear the captain's voice somewhere behind him, shouting orders through the chaos. "Hold the line! Hold the line!" The sky began to turn gray again. Dawn. The longest night of their lives was ending. The enemy attacks slowed. They were exhausted, broken, scattered. By sunrise they began to retreat, leaving the hill in American hands. Samuel lowered his rifle and looked around. The trench was quiet. Only a handful of men were standing. Smoke rose in thin streams from the wreckage of the battlefield. He limped toward the captain, who was sitting against a broken wall, his face pale. "We did it, sir," Samuel said. Captain Lane looked up at the flag they had planted 2 days before. It still stood, torn but unbroken. "We held," he whispered. When reinforcements finally arrived that afternoon, only 11 men of Iron Company were alive. They had held the hill against overwhelming force. They were carried down the slope on stretchers, too weak to walk, but their flag went with them. News of the defense spread quickly. Journalists wrote about the last hill, calling it a miracle of courage. But the men who survived never called it a miracle. They called it duty. Months later, when the war finally ended, Samuel returned home. He married his sweetheart, worked the fields his father once plowed, and tried to forget the sound of shells in the night. But every winter, when the first snow fell, he remembered. 20 years later, in 1964, Samuel returned to Belgium. He walked the long road to Iron Hill, now peaceful and covered in trees. A monument stood there, small and simple, with the names of the fallen carved in stone. He found Sergeant Miller's name, traced it with his hand, and stood in silence. He looked out across the valley. Birds flew where once artillery had roared. He could still see it in his mind, the smoke, the flashes, the faces of the men. He closed his eyes and whispered, "We didn't let them climb the hill." Tourists sometimes visited the site, but few understood what had happened there. Only the wind seemed to remember. It moved gently through the trees, like a voice speaking from the past. Samuel saluted the flag that still flew above the memorial. It flapped softly in the cold air. He thought of Captain Lane, who had died the year after the war, buried with full honors. He thought of Dean, of the medic, of every man who had fought not for glory, but for each other. The last hill of Iron Company was not marked by gold medals or grand speeches. It was marked by something greater. The quiet pride of those who knew they had stood their ground when standing seemed impossible. Every American who heard their story felt something stir inside, not just pride, but understanding. That freedom is not built by comfort, but by courage. That peace is bought by those willing to fight for strangers they'll never meet. And so the story of Iron Company became more than a tale of war. It became a piece of America's soul, a reminder that in the darkest, coldest hour, the heart of a free people burns brightest. The hill still stands today. The snow still falls. The wind still carries the faint sound of rifles and voices that refuse to fade. And if you stand there long enough, you can almost hear Captain Lane's voice once more, steady, proud, unbroken, saying, "No one climbs this hill but us, and no one ever did."